Alex,
Yes, sir.
you and I are both, I wouldn't call us avid fishermen, but we do enjoy a nice day out on the lake.
And quite much. Yes, we do. Very much. Sorry, I'm a little thrown off today because if you can't see in the video, my camera's acting up on me. I mean, it was a bit of a hand-me-down camera from Tyler from a couple years ago now, so it's
Yeah.
maybe
Um,
time for a new one.
but my question for you today is what is your favorite fish to catch and consume?
that is that is a tough one because like something as simple as like bluegill and crappie are fun to catch because
Yeah.
they're little but they got a lot of fight in them. Bass are fun too, but to eat, my favorite fish to eat is either mahi mahi, like a nice fried mahi mahi sandwich because you get a nice big fat
You get a
fillet.
decent like steak.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Or catfish, like a good fried catfish. It's some good stuff. I'm a big catfish guy. I like fish. I mean, I know fried fish isn't good for you, but it's good for the
Yeah,
soul.
no. It's very good for the soul. And I bring that up because, my brother just got back from Key West, whatever. And he likes to brag about all the enjoyable fish that he got to catch and eat. But also today, we're talking about some of the most popular game fish,
Yeah.
at least in North America. But before we get into it, we're kind of keeping a little surprise for you guys on what we're talking about. Before we get into it, we'll start with our nature in the news, like we always do. I came prepared. I read the article before we started recording.
Good job. I skimmed through it. It's been a busy couple days. So I didn't get a chance this morning.
Yeah. So today's article is titled "How Madagascar's Lizards Became the Island's Last Hope for Reforestation." This was published on June 10th by the Kyoto University, which is in Japan.
Okay.
So basically, the rundown of this article is, whenever you think of like reforestation, you think of, mammals and birds eating seeds because they eat fruit or nuts or
Yeah.
what have you, and they, poop it out as a byproduct later on, and that's how
Yeah.
they spread the seeds.
Yeah. The seed doesn't always get digested the whole way. And a lot of time, there are a lot of seeds that have developed. So the fruit's like really edible, but the actual seed itself is real hard and like not really able to be digested for that sole purpose.
Right. So that's called endozoochory, I believe is the technical term.
Okay.
But basically, what we figured out is, the lemurs and birds of Madagascar, they eat some of the fruit and stuff, but there's a good 20 plant species on the island that just don't get consumed as much by like the larger mammals and birds as they do by like some of the lizards and stuff. So, and Madagascar is kind of a strange like mishmash of ecosystem because it's its own island, and islands have their own unique ecosystems in general. And
Yes.
Madagascar is such a large ecosystem, large island that it doesn't really suffer from some of the other problems that other islands have.
Yeah. It's got it doesn't the island rule is not quite and it's still relatively close to like mainland Africa that it's kind of like some more migratory birds could make it over there without too much trouble, but it's far enough is the real thing.
Right. So basically, the article says that about less than 10% of all lizard species have been reported to consume fruits, but the ones that do are the ones they're really looking at for this article. They focused on the Malagasy giant chameleon, Cuvier's Madagascar swift, and the western girdled lizard. Those are three species that they know consume fruits, but hadn't been like heavily studied before in the past. And so this is like comparing that like these 20 plant species aren't consumed by like the prime like suspect, not suspect, but their prime like comparison for like a frugivore mammal was the common brown lemur. And there's areas of Madagascar that are more degraded per se that the brown lemur doesn't live in, but there's a handful or so of those lizard species that do, and that's where you're seeing a lot of like is because of these lizards.
Nice.
That's all I have. Do you have
Yeah, that's
anything
pretty
else to
cool.
add from your little skimming?
No, I mean that's pretty neat. In fact, I mean it makes sense that the lemurs are going to be more sensitive to things like human activity, not as where the lizards are a little less. They don't care as much. It's just because they're smaller.
Yeah, they're
Their
smaller and they
brain
can.
they don't have as much like their brains aren't developed in the same way as the lemurs are, where they like that sort of stuff bothers them.
Yeah, but that's gonna do it for today's nature in the news. We'll move on into our lesson. If you didn't get the hints and everything today, today's lesson is on the Salmoniformes, which are a smallish, largest group. They're kind of right in the middle in terms of like size for what we've talked about so far in terms of number of species. But they include, your salmon, hence the name Salmoniformes, your trout, which are a close living relative to salmon, as well as the pike and the mud minnows. Those are a separate subfamily within this order. As
Nice.
I stated, these guys are native to the temperate and subarctic northern hemisphere. So they live kind of like above the tropic line. So what is
Mm,
that? We say 20 degrees
like,
latitude.
yes, that'd be in like temperate. My dog is squeaking. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
She has a chew toy.
However, we have found fossils dating back to around the late Cretaceous period that travel as far south as Africa, like Algeria, Morocco area. So northern Africa, not too far south. So our first two groups are Escoidae and Umbridae. These are going to be your pike and your mud minnow. Umbridae only has the one genus, uh, which would be Umbra. So there's four living genera between these two groups. Esox, which are the pike and pickerel, Dahlia, Umbra, and Novumbra. These guys can be found through Esox live throughout Eurasia and North America, so they have the widest range. Dahlia is the next largest, uh, has the next largest range. They live primarily in Alaska and East Siberia, while the group Novabra lives only in the Olympic Peninsula of Washington.
Oh.
These guys have larger eyes, so they are primarily, and they have really good eyesight for their eyes. So they are primarily ambush predators through sight. Like a lot of times, whenever you think of pike, you like what is it, the grass pike? Is that grass
Uh,
pickerel?
Grass pickerel, yeah.
Yeah, they kind of like live in the taller grass, like the reedy areas of a lake, or uh, so they can cut, and they have really good camouflage
Yeah.
for their body type.
Yeah,
And
the image I have pulled up here is of a northern pike, which is a bit big, is one of the bigger species in the family. But you can see the kind of the way the coloration is, they would blend in a lot with the vegetation.
right, uh, so and even still, whenever food's really getting rough, the pike and blackfish, which would be Esox and Dahlia, they're known to be cannibals, so they'll actually eat each other, which isn't uncommon in fish species, I don't think. I wouldn't
Yeah,
say.
yeah, that I can't say it's uncommon, but it's probably just more common in these species.
Yeah,
I'm sure some species like at least recognize their own and kind of try to avoid eating each other even when food starts getting rough.
right. And the mud minnows of that Novumbra family, the ones that live in the Olympic Peninsula,
I have
they are very territorial.
I
So
have
so
a mud minnow on the screen.
awesome. Which one minnow is that?
That is, I don't know specifically. It is a native, one of the native ones. The eastern mud minnow. Sorry,
Okay. So
Umbra pygmaea.
awesome. Appreciate. Oh, okay. So they're more European. They're introduced to Europe actually, but they live in New York. So yeah, East
Nice.
Mississippi. Awesome. Um, yeah, they're known to fight anything their size. They'll get in a fight with to protect their young. But between these groups, there's quite a handful of species, and luckily most of these species are actually named. We don't have to go in and list off any like weird scientific names. Just for example, like in that genus Esox, there's 7 species. So you have uh, the Shane pickerel, the American pickerel, which are kind of more slender than a typical pike. Like a pike has a lot of muscle to it. Am I right, Alex?
Yeah, I mean they're all very, very long, very, very slender. Allows them to be very fast in the water. But yeah, they're going to be a little. They're not going to be quite as large as the pike, like the pickerels are a bit smaller than the pike and the muskellunge.
Well, muskellunge is a different beast altogether. I mean, it's
Oh, it's a
yes, it's a
different
pike.
species. Yeah,
It's a pike still, but it's
they get quite large.
in comparison to the rest of the group, they are massive.
Yes, yeah. You'll see 40-inch muskellunge, so almost 4 feet long
Yeah,
in
so
the large lake system. So they're in freshwater ecosystems where they exist. They are one of the top, if not the top predators.
right. So the muskellunge is one of the subgenus Esox as a pike, along with the Amur pike, which lives in Northeast Asia, primarily Russia, as well as the northern pike, southern pike, and Aquitainean pike.
It looks like the southern pike and the Aquitanian pike are more recently
Yeah,
discovered,
we're
or at
gonna
least
talk about one
described.
later.
Okay.
And that's really gonna do it for uh this group. There's a couple like November has two species. They have the Olympic mud minnow and then an extinct species, November or Oregonensis, which was found in Oregon. They look really cool, the artist recreation of it.
That is sweet.
So Alex, would you like to talk a little bit about
Oh, yes.
Salmonida today?
I would love to talk about Salmonidae. So this family, this is the family that contains your salmon, trout, char, graylings, taimans, and lennox. So those first two are probably something that a lot of you have heard of, even if you're not fishermen or whatever. A lot of people have heard of salmon. It's a very common food fish. And trout is fairly common as a common game fish. I'm sure you've at least heard of it in passing. So in this family, there are 11 genera that have 200 species. So there are a lot of these guys, a lot of different species. I'm sure most of them fit into the specific salmon and trout groups.
I also forgot to add on our note sheet. This includes the whitefish as well.
Oh, it includes whitefish. Okay.
Yep.
So they are considered more primitive in appearance compared to other fish and teleosteae because they have their pelvic fins placed further back and they have an adipose fin in the rear. So something that when we talked about a lot of the fish a little bit ago, or more recently, I should say, a lot of them lack that adipose fin. They tend to have very slender bodies with rounded scales. Yeah, so Tyler here has a Chinook salmon, which are pretty crazy looking. We'll talk about that. We may talk about them a little bit just because there's some neat things that some of these, a lot of the species in this family do that are different from many others. But it says slender bodies. You can see they have very rounded scales and forked tails. So the rounded scales give them a very kind of smooth, uniform appearance.
This picture is kind of bad to look at the forked tail.
Yeah,
but it's very pronounced.
yes. They can range. A lot of them have a single row of teeth, just kind of right around the fringe. They range from about 13 centimeters, so relatively small, all the way up to 2 meters, which is about 6 feet in length. So they can get, some of them are quite small and some of them can get fairly large as well. They are all migratory spawners, which means they migrate to lay their eggs. They lay their eggs in shallow gravel beds that are typically upstream in fresh water, and then they move down towards larger bodies of water as they mature. Now, some migrate a little less, like some of the trout, like where we live in Pennsylvania. Brown trout is a native trout species that is mostly found in like cold headwater type of waterways. But some of them, like a lot of the salmon, especially like the Chinook salmon we have here, they live as adults in saltwater and then they migrate up freshwater rivers and streams to lay their eggs. So this is called being euryhaline, which means that they can survive in both fresh, brackish, and saltwater, which is very unique. Usually you only get one. The migratory act from the fresh to the saltwater is called. We'll talk about that more later. Pretty much all of them are carnivorous predators. They feed on smaller fish, crustaceans, tadpoles, insects, before they get eaten by larger predators. So they're kind of that first or second trophic level. Many of them, if you've ever seen videos of the brown bear and grizzly bear out in Alaska and out in the western United States, catching fish in the river as they're jumping up the waterfalls. Those are typically migratory salmon. They are typically important keystone organisms because they are that middle consumer in both marine and freshwater ecosystems, making them an important food source for those upper level predators, like I said, like birds of prey, any
Bears.
bears, yeah, anything that eats fish like that. But they eat a lot of invertebrates and those lower level species. There are three main clades that have originated, or they're believed to be originating from about the late Cretaceous period. And then that divergence from a lot of other teleos is supposed to be marked, I think.
Yes, marked.
Yes.
Good job, spell check.
By a genome duplication event where that diploid teleos ancestor became a tetraploid. So for a little bit of a genetics lesson, typically most is for genetics, your chromosomes are typically, it's called diploid, means you have 2 pairs. Well, this tetraploid means now you have 4 pairs. So somewhere along the line, something didn't split the way it was supposed to, and it wound up with having 4 pairs.
And by something, it means the entire genome.
Yes. And that's something that's very rare in animals. Usually plants, you see that a lot more. It doesn't affect them near as much. A lot of times in animals, when you have any sort of polyploidy, meaning multiple genes, is typically fatal or at least causes severe defects. Like something like I guess sort of an example of like a polyploidy is Down syndrome, where you have 3 of the chromosome 21 in humans or whatever it is, because there are other animals that can exhibit a form of Down syndrome. It causes some sort of disability in humans as we classify it. It's not it's some sort of typically not a good change, but for these guys it works well for them. And most modern Salmoniformes still exhibit a partial tetraploidy, but many of them have started kind of reselecting to return to that diploidy. So I'm sure whatever gave them that advantage being tetraploidy has now, it probably just uses too much energy. And so the genomes are over time selecting back out for it to basically it is making it more efficient. All the genetic replication and protein building, it's just making it more efficient. Like they don't need all those copies of the same thing. But that is all I have for these guys. They are pretty cool, very popular.
Do you want to talk about a couple of the genera?
We can talk about a couple of them. Yeah, I know. I could talk about the Chinook salmon a little bit. Well, if you want to pull up like a genus you really like. So with that Chinook salmon, the reason that picture looked kind of funky is because the male salmon, when they're spawning, go through a pretty drastic change where they go from an ocean, like in the ocean, they're very silvery, have very kind of rounded heads, to then they enter those freshwater river systems, and the males especially turn a very vibrant pink color, and their jaw kind of elongates. Yes, there you go. That's a sockeye salmon. So related, there is very dramatic in the sockeye salmon. You can see that the jaw kind of really elongates and becomes much larger, and they use that to fight with other males and kind of display to the females there who's the best mate is the best way to describe that.
Yeah. So both the sockeye salmon and the what was the other one we were talking about? It completely
Chinook salmon.
Chinook, yeah, are within the genera Oncorhynchus. So this is probably the most popular group of Salmoniform. You know, these guys have 12 species with a couple subspecies. So we're talking like your golden trout, your cutthroat trout. There's like 4 different subspecies of cutthroat trout.
Rainbow trout, which we'll talk about later.
The pink salmon, the chum salmon, the coho salmon, the Japanese salmon, rainbow trout, sockeye, chinook are members of this genus. And then the other more popular genera within Salmoniformes would be Salmo. So the Oncorhynchus are Pacific salmon and trout. So the migratory species fluctuate out into the Pacific Ocean. For Salmo, they're Atlantic salmon and trout. So they fluctuate into the Atlantic Ocean, and these guys are more prominent in Europe and the eastern United States.
Yes, they are, I believe, actually native to the eastern U.S. It's kind of a very, if you go back in geologic time when the eastern United States and in Western Europe were still together, it makes sense why these guys are native to both of those areas.
Yeah, and over time, as the continent separated, they've divided into their own. There's a lot of subspecies that came out of this, and just species in general. Black sea trout, Macedonian trout. The list goes on. There's about like 47 species within this group. There's another group called Salmoniformes, which has 50 species. Those are more like your char species. But out of like the North American species for that, out of Salmoniformes, you have the silver trout, the brook trout, the lake trout, are the main three. There's a bull trout and a Dolly Varden trout as well. But that's gonna do it for a little deep dive. We didn't go too deep into it, but we're not done yet. We have
We're not.
plenty left to talk about.
Oh, as always, yeah. I didn't want to get too deep into these guys. One, because they're kind of similar. Once you start narrowing it down, they just fit into very different niches, and there's a lot of them. We don't want to bore you guys with all of that. It gets, because especially talking about fish, it can get very boring very quickly. As cool as it is, they get a bit similar after a while, especially once you
Plus, the
start.
podcast is Life the Complete Story, not
Yes.
Fish the Complete Story.
Yes, we do not want to bore you to tears.
But
Maybe just a little bit.
Alex, as you were
Yeah.
saying, rainbow trout fits in that. What was it? Oncorhynchus genera.
Yes.
So those are found in the Pacific area, hence when they're Pacific salmon and trout.
Yes.
What happens if the rainbow trout goes someplace not the Pacific, where it's not really supposed to be?
It becomes one of the world's most invasive fish.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, so rainbow trout can get anywhere from like 1 to 2 feet in length, so they get decently large for a freshwater fish. They're typically fast swimmers. They can tolerate a lot of different environments, especially like warm water, cold water, even some pretty rough like runoff from just excessive logging. Some of that starts getting a little rougher, and because they've been so popular as game fish, so to fishermen, especially in the United States, but really across the world, they were very popular fish, and because of that, they have been stocked into rivers and lakes and ponds and everything pretty much throughout the world. Which in some places it's not too bad. Like here in the eastern United States, it's not that big of a deal because we already had like the native brook trout. So it was just kind of, now they are kind of pushing out competing the native brook trout in some areas, but
not to the level it outcompetes other fish in other areas.
Correct. Yeah. And a lot of those areas, especially like where native brook trout are, they don't get very big and they're like little cool, like cold headwater stream areas, and they just can't support the size that the rainbow trout gets because it gets bigger faster. And typically those areas they specifically stock them with more brook trout just to kind of to minimize that negative competition. But in areas where they are completely foreign to, such as places that have never had trout, like Australia and New Zealand, they can reproduce pretty rapidly. They displace native trout, so they say they're not great. And then they are very voracious eaters to the point where they eat so many aquatic invertebrates that it's a detriment to species across the board,
Yep.
which is not something you think about, especially here in the United States. You're like, oh, it's a rainbow trout. You catch it and you eat it and take it home and it tastes good. But you don't realize the impact that it has on a lot of those lakes and streams.
Yeah, I was funny. I was watching an Instagram reel right before we hit the record button, right before you joined the call. Um, and it was talking about rainbow trout versus brook trout, and catching them.
Mm-hmm.
And the rainbow trout can eat up to like 500 midges a day.
I think I saw the
Yeah,
same reel you're talking about.
and then it was talking about the brook trout, who eats like
Eh,
five
like crayfish.
five
Like,
crayfish.
yeah.
So it's talking about, as an angler, it's talking about your chance to catch one, because the rainbow trout is 500 midges a day. You throw a midge with a fly reel, it's gonna hit it.
Yeah, you have a pretty good chance of catching one.
But if you're talking about a brook trout that only eats 4 crawfish a day, say it's already had 3,
Yeah.
you're really banking on that one hitting.
Yeah, exactly. And because that, like I said, and that's one fish, 500 a day. That's a lot of insect. Now, of course, insects are similar to most fish, where they spawn, when they reproduce in.
They go the quantity over quality
Yes,
route.
yeah, that's what I was looking at or thinking about. I just wasn't coming out. Yeah, the quantity over quality. So there's a lot of them, but eventually the quantity will run out.
Yeah, especially in areas
That's a
where
problem.
they just get out competed.
Yeah.
And this isn't the first time we talked about rainbow trout on our show being invasive, because when I do my segment and I'm talking about a foreign fish, typically somewhere in the threats column, there is a rainbow trout mentioned.
Yeah. And a lot of it said, there's on this site I have right here, it's for every person born in the United States every year, federal and state hatcheries raise and stock about 20 rainbow trout into public waters. So there are a lot of rainbow trout in the United States, and if you have to
Which
think,
is more than fine, because our waters can, sustain that.
yeah, in the United States, even where they're not native to, they still follow that, like they're just introduced. They're not quite invasive. Now, certain areas they are, it just depends. But we have other predators, and because they are such popular game fish, a lot of people catch and take them. So it helps control that population a little bit. But
Yeah, when we're talking areas like Asia and Australia, where the only predator-prey interaction they have is through anglers catching them and consuming them, the population just runs rampant because there's no natural predator for it in those areas. Some things have adapted over time, but very few in comparison to
and usually at that point, it's getting too late to make enough of a difference quick enough to help it recover.
Anything else to add, Alex?
That's all I got for these guys. I mean, they're very tasty, and they're kind of pretty to look at, especially one is called a palomino, where instead of this kind of greenish brown or gray and with the pink line, they're actually like a gold color. They look very cool, and they're very tasty, fun to catch, but not great for non-native areas.
So steelhead is a Great Lake variant of a rainbow trout.
It is a lake run rainbow trout. So they tend to be even larger, and they're more silver. They kind of lose that pink line.
Okay, that was my question. Is there a visual difference between a lake run trout and a stream run trout?
Yeah, just in the size of them, they can get closer to 3 feet. I think they can get quite large.
No, I knew they were a lot larger because they have a lot more space to grow.
Yes,
I just wasn't sure on visuals between the pink line and stuff like that.
Yeah, they tend to be more strictly silver, as well as, like I said, they're larger and they're bulkier as well. Because they have a lot more access to food, they tend to be much bulkier. Like their bodies are thicker.
Right. Okay, so that's going to move us on into our amazing species for the day. I couldn't think of my own segment name. We're talking about the Aquitainean Pike, which I have a picture.
Oh, I was about to say, do you have a picture? Because I was about to. Pulling
Have a
up.
picture.
What a champ.
Thank you, iNaturalist.
Yes, sir.
So these guys are a pike species from that Esox genera. These guys are found in Europe, specifically the kind of like the area of southwestern France, like right on the border of Spain, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a largish area.
Yeah.
They're near threatened, so they're not doing too bad. However, they were discovered really until 2012, 2014-ish, I think is the date. And the reason it's only near threatened and not like vulnerable or further down is because the range threshold, it doesn't reach the range threshold for the population versus range.
Okay.
So there's enough, it has a small enough range and a big enough population that's only near threatened.
Okay.
But there is still a proposed 30% decrease over the past 3 generations, even though we don't have a set generation length because we haven't known about them really long enough to test generation lengths. As I said, they live in France and the inland freshwaters. The proposed generation length is 15 years, and they are non-migratory. And our threats we have are actually hybridization, which is a weird one. So
Yeah, that's a new, that's one you really don't see a lot.
there's a lot of crossbreeding between pike and trout and salmon species. I
Okay.
don't know if that's because of the tetraploidy or not. But these guys will interbreed with Esox lucius, which is the northern pike, which is the most abundant pike species. So as they're introducing more northern pike for commercial and recreational purposes, they're breeding more with these Aquitainean pikes. So we're having more sterile crossbreeds and not enough original species.
Very
Yeah,
cool. It's saying here too that the lot of the non-native and hatchery fish within its range are introducing other things like parasites as well as just outcompeting them.
yeah, no, that checks out.
Yeah, that's pretty standard.
Yeah, there's other things that go on which are typical. The list goes on of effluent runoff from natural gas or farming or agriculture, things like that, as well as just urban and domestic pollution. And it's also considered a food fish across part of its range. In terms of use and trade, it is a national sport fish as well as a local food fish. And we do not have a lot of conservation acts in place. We have a harvest management plan, so I'd assume that's kind of like how
Fishing
we,
license,
fishing
like
license stamp that says you can
catch
only.
limits, yeah.
We have it has XC2 conservation, which means it's taken out of its natural habitat and like kind of like kept in captivity for breeding and species management. And there is education in place as well as invasive species prevention, and it lives in some protected areas. And that's all I have for this guy, which will lead us to our final subject.
Yes.
Today, Ecology Encyclopedia covers fish migratory patterns. I figured it was fitting,
Yeah.
being that salmon and trout are some of the more migratory fish species. So we break this down into 4 types, we'll say. The first one, Alex, if you want to talk about it, we talked about it earlier.
Yes, that is the anadromy, which is what your salmon do. So you start life in freshwater, go to saltwater for the adult life, and then return to freshwater to spawn. Now, typically for salmon, this results in the salmon not making the trip back to the saltwater. But that is anadromy, is that so fresh salt fresh is the easy way to put that. That is the more extreme of them, especially in the case of the salmon. Is probably the most extreme of the whole list that we're going to talk about here, just because of that movement from completely freshwater to completely saltwater. We'll talk about one a little later where it's more not quite as intense.
Yeah, so the next one would be we'll go with the next most, like, intense, and that would be, like, uh,
Probably catadromy.
catadromy. So that's what'll, like we talked about, so we did lampreys
Yeah,
way back when.
it's basically the inverse of anadromy.
Yeah. So that'll be, like, you spawn in saltwater and you travel to freshwater. So a lamprey typically reproduces, and they lay eggs in the Atlantic Ocean. As they hatch, the fry per se. I don't think lamprey really have designated fry.
I think it's more like just larva.
Yeah, they will make their way back upstream, and since we'll use the Great Lakes as an example because that's kind of like one of the things they do is they'll go whatever that channel is in New York that I can't remember the name of that kind of like feeds into Lake Erie.
Like the Erie Canal?
Sure, that one.
I'm not positive.
I know there is an Erie Canal, obviously, but either way, the sea lamprey goes from the Atlantic Ocean where it lays its eggs, comes back as a larvae through this canal or whatever river, typically lives in Lake Erie or another Great Lake, feasts off the fish that aren't used to it being there, uh,
Are you
and
think
then
are you thinking of
matures
like
there.
the Buffalo River or
I have no idea, brother.
the Niagara River, like going from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario?
Probably just the Erie Canal at this point.
Okay. I'm speculating,
Yeah.
to be fully honest with you.
You know what I was definitely thinking of? The St. Lawrence that feeds into Ontario.
Probably.
Most definitely. Anyway, that's probably what they do is they go through the St. Lawrence. Although I don't know if they do because of how far north it is. But they
Yeah, I'm
go
not sure.
through the river. Long story short, they go
Yes.
through the river,
Yes.
mature in Lake Erie, and then go back out to the ocean to spawn.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The St. Lawrence goes all the way from Lake Ontario through like Montreal and Quebec out
Yeah. And
into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which
which
it
feeds into the
becomes.
Atlantic.
Yes.
So that's what is it? Catadromy.
Yes.
There's two more. So we'll do amphidromy because that's probably the next most
Yes.
complex. So for amphidromy, you split the difference and you lay your eggs in the brackish water. So you will lay your egg in like your estuary or like a river delta, hatch, live as a fry juvenile in the marine ecosystem, and then migrate to freshwater, which really confuses me.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I could think of is the availability of food in a marine ecosystem compared to freshwater would make the growth, like the speed of like a juvenile that like adolescence, quote unquote, would make that the ability to grow faster more easy because there's more food to consume. That'd be my best guess.
I guess.
And then you move to, once you reach adulthood, you move back to the freshwater ecosystem because it is safer as you get larger. There's less big predators in freshwater
I guess.
compared to saltwater. That one's kind of funky.
That one's weird. I'm not a big fan of that one. And then lastly, we have Podamidromus. That's the word. Which is basically what a brook trout does.
Yeah, goes from your upstream, so those colder headwaters, then travels downstream as it gets older and larger, so it has more space, and then but it travels back upstream to spawn.
Yes. There is one more. That's called Oceanodromus, which is pretty much the same thing as Podamidromus, but rather than um, going upstream to downstream, back upstream, you have a set spawning ground and you have a reef that you like mature at.
Yeah,
This is more in like grouper.
Yeah.
That's the most generic in my eyes. But that's gonna do it for today.
Yeah, that'll wrap us up for today.
Yeah. So, as always, make sure to follow us on Spotify at Life Complete Story. Subscribe on YouTube at Life the Complete Story. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Life Complete Story. Send us an email at lifecompletestory@gmail.com and follow us on Facebook at Life the Complete Story. That's all of them, right, Alex? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, it
Instagram,
sounds about right.
TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, email, and Facebook. Yeah, we're good. 6 things. And, yeah, we'll see you guys next week when we talk about, the next group, or 2 groups probably, actually. We'll probably talk about dragonfish and freshwater smelt.
Ooh, yeah. Well, then here we'll be able to talk about the amphidromy a little bit with the smelt because that was our example species.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Alright.
Tying it in. Yes,
Alex, what do we
sir.
always say as we leave us off?
As we leave off, we always say to keep on learning, learn something new. You never know what you find interesting. But thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time.